Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. How does this sound at the back there? Good. Yeah, it seems better now. Okay, my name is Jasper Dent, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers, Saskatoon. This event is being held on Treaty 6 territory. This is the land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and homeland of the Métis. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of At Least We'll Always Have Spring by Taylor Balfour. Thank you so much to Taylor for being here tonight and for working with us to create this event. Please just note that this event is being live streamed. We've got a web camera up to your right here. We'll just be filming the stage, not the audience. I'd also like to take this moment to remind you all to silence or turn off your phones. If it goes off during the event, it'll be embarrassing for you and everyone around you. So best to avoid that. If you would like to buy copies of At Least We'll Always Have Spring, we have some up on the signing table here and also on the desk by where you came in. You're welcome to get your book signed before you buy it. Just please remember to stop by the cash desk on your way out. We would really appreciate that. Now, with that housekeeping out of the way, I would like to introduce our author this evening. Taylor Balfour is a writer, poet, and creative from Regina, Saskatchewan. This is cutting in and out, isn't it? Just a moment. Just. Luckily, I have a backup microphone. Okay, here we go. It's talking about Taylor Balfour. She's a writer, poet, and creative from Regina, Saskatchewan. Her poetry explores mental health, addiction, and grief. After losing her sister, Rachel, to fentanyl poisoning in 2019, Taylor's passion turned to advocacy for harm reduction and safe consumption. Why is this microphone dying too? When not writing or advocating, she enjoys reading, gaming, and snuggling with her cat and bunny. I'm gonna pause again. Oh, now we're back. Okay, I'm gonna fix this by the time you're up here speaking. We will also be joined by Heather Balfour, Taylor's mom, who is going to be our interviewer and MC for this evening. Now, I'm going to put this microphone back in its stand. Hopefully it will keep working, but I'll be able to work on it better over there. So everyone, please give Taylor a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Jasper, very much for that introduction. And I will just say I am Heather Balfour. I am Taylor's mother. I'm really honored actually to be asked by Taylor to MC this event tonight because not only am I Taylor's mom, but I also quite admire her poetry. I think she has a real talent in words and writing, and I'm just excited to be here to speak with her in front of you tonight. So we want to thank McNally Robinson. Thank you to everyone who's come here in Saskatoon to meet with us tonight. And also thanks to all the people who have joined in on the online streaming. Happy to have you here with us tonight. I will tell you a little bit about the agenda, how the evening is going to work. Taylor has prepared a short presentation. She's going to then read a couple of selections from her book, a couple of her poems. And then she and I will do a little bit of a short interview together, and that will include lots of opportunity for any questions from anyone here in the room and anyone who's joining us online. And then we will finish the evening over here with anyone who would like their book signed. A couple of folks got theirs signed already, but for those that haven't yet had a chance to do that, we'll have an opportunity to do that later. So before we get going, Taylor's poetry is quite heavy. It covers some very serious issues. But I did want to talk a little bit with a light start. Taylor's dad and myself always knew that Taylor was going to be a writer. She was going to end up doing something with her life to do with words and putting words on paper and into the world. So I was reminding her this week of this wonderful piece of historical fiction that she wrote for me in 2009 when she had just turned barely 11 years old. And this was my Mother's Day present in 2009. This is a lovely historical fiction piece that is about me. It's about her mom becoming the head coach of the Ottawa Senators of the National Hockey League because they were dismal, and Taylor really wanted me to be their coach to turn them around. And that's exactly what I did in this book. Actually, I won the Stanley Cup coaching the Ottawa Senators, so I'm very happy about that. And then, of course, on a much sadder note, of course, tragedy hit our family in 2019 when our daughter Rachel and Taylor's sister died suddenly, shocking, and unexpectedly from fentanyl poisoning. We all handled our grief in different ways. All three of us were shocked and horrified, and each handled ours in different ways. Taylor's way to handle her grief was to write, and that's why we're here today. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Taylor.
Okay, again, good evening to everyone, and thank you all again for coming. I want to thank my mom for introducing me, and I want to give another thank you to McNally Robinson for hosting us. McNally Robinson has always been one of my favorite bookstores in the world, specifically because as a little girl, I would look past the local author section, and I always wondered how cool it would be to have a book there. And now I am 26 years old and can say that I know what it feels like, and it feels very good. However, I never would have expected the book that would land me on that shelf. On February 5th, 2019, my family and I were notified by Regina City Police that my little sister, Rachel, had been found dead in her university dorm room. While that day will forever be a part of me and our family, it stands for and represents a lot more now. It was the end of a chapter of my life that I will never get back. Yesterday would have been Rachel's 24th birthday. And instead of celebrating with her, we celebrated for her. And tonight we are going to honor her. There's so many things that I could say about Rachel and that I have said about Rachel. Most people, whether they've met her or not, probably already know that she liked leather jackets and Coca-Cola, Slurpees, computers, and video games. But grief is funny, and somehow those aren't the things that I miss the most about her. I miss the snarky attitude that she would give me when we couldn't decide on something to watch together. I miss the way that she would roll her eyes whenever I would complain about something. I miss the way that she would laugh at her own jokes, or the way that her nose would crinkle when she found something really funny. But that's what I hope that this book can capture, that grief is not a feeling, that it is both an act and a state of being. Grief is your worst enemy, but it's also your best friend. We hate grief because it makes us feel so low, but grief, and we love and need grief because it means that we remember. As they say, grief is love with nowhere to go. So I made mine go somewhere, and I put it on paper. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by Anne Frank. Paper has more patience than people. And it's true. Paper can understand the heart and mind in a way that no person can match. And that's what makes it so special. In the spring of 2019, a few months after Rachel passed away, we received a letter in the mail. It was from Rachel's university English professor. Tonight I would like to read a small excerpt for you.
I think that one's died as well.
Oh no, that's okay. I can also just yell.
Hello.
Now we're cooking. So I would like to read a small excerpt for you. Like so many students do, Rachel told me that her sister had just had some poetry published and that Rachel wanted to master her understanding of literature so that she could show her how interested in and proud of her work she was. Rachel also came and spoke to me after class about what the best gift a writer might appreciate. I was touched and delighted by how excited she was at her sister's success. And that is what makes writing so special. But this book is about so much more than just my story or Rachel's story. There are two sides to this book. One side is my side, my story. The other side is your side, our side. This book is also about activism. In Canada, every day, on average, there are 21 opioid-related deaths. There are over 96 responses to suspected opioid-related overdoses per day. Out of all opioid-related poisoning emergency department visits, 75% of them were people between the ages of 20 and 49. Between January and March of this year, in only 3 months, fentanyl and its similar drugs were involved in 47% of opioid-related poisoning emergency department visits. These are all statistics provided by the Government of Canada for this year, 2024, and our year is not over yet. There is a crisis that is blatantly right in front of us. And to put it plainly, the reason that this crisis developed is because of stigma, stereotypes, and a lack of education. Because the opioid crisis is not just about opioids. It's about mental health, depression, anxiety, homelessness, racism, poverty, bigotry, and trauma. It's a national health crisis that is caused by a lot of things, and we're scared to talk about it. Rachel was a straight A honor roll student. She was attending university. She was applying for jobs. She was an active and regular volunteer in her community and often advocated for access to better mental health services and would advocate for the homeless. But it happened to her, and it happened to us, and it can happen to you too. And yet we still isolate each other as humans. We push each other away and we refuse to talk about it or acknowledge it. And that's only made this crisis that much worse. Now it's time for us to be vulnerable and to talk about it. And I hope that if anything, this book can be just that, vulnerable. I hope that this book can open the door for discussion, not just in public forums like this one, but within homes, behind closed doors, and between friends and family. I want this book to celebrate the value of vulnerability and the value of talking about it. I'm now going to read a snippet from a poem that I have called The Warning in the Wallpaper. Autumn is winter's gatekeeper. Her decay is fierce and wild. She is ripe and gracious, loud and bewitched. We watch the earth burn to ash without the grace of a funeral. But winter has come and gone. Its knife brushed my throat for many moons and tidings, and I now know why autumn is my favorite. Her soul, and her whole being has been sacrificed for me. Sweet familiarity. Light pierces the veil and attacks the bookcase, a morning ode from summer's mother. I wonder what she's trying to tell me, but I know. I know. It's getting colder. How will morning ever feel the same without the day peeking through the cracks in the birch? Like a lifetime in the pavement, the blonde wisps in the sky and are a sacrifice made for a new day. It gets colder and colder. All the way down we go. And I would also like to read a small snippet of a poem that is called What You Are. This world is so loud, and yet spring is so soft. The soft sanctuary after your survival. Remember that nook in the galaxy, to the right of the sun, where your memories sleep. When the streets are too fierce, the stars can call you home. You are here. You have survived. Welcome to spring, my dear new flower. The garden is quiet and waiting. Come on in, my love. I have been working on this book for 5 years, and it has acted as a life preserver. This is the equivalent of me giving everyone a tour through the state of my heart and mind for the last 5, almost 6 years. And admittedly, that's really scary, but there's power in vulnerability. That's why I knew my mom would be the perfect host for this event, because nothing is more vulnerable than that type of conversation. I love words, but the truth is that words never did justice to how I was feeling. And in a lot of ways, they still don't. The poetry, molding, and crafting words was the only way I felt like I could actually be heard. Because grief is indescribable, but that's why we have poetry. I want tonight to be an opportunity for us to come together and celebrate the messiness that grief can cause and the art that can come from it. Because even though grief is messy, it's one of the many things that make us human. And it's one of the many things that unite us. And talking about it is how we can all help ensure that this does not happen to more families like mine ever again. Thank you.
Is no
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Just, oh yes, it's working just fine. All right. Thank you, Taylor, for sharing your remarks and for sharing those 2 poems with us. I have prepared some questions that I'm going to use as an interview with Taylor, even though we know each other quite well. But I prepared a couple of questions, and absolutely any questions from anyone here in the audience is more than welcome, as well as from our people who are joining online. It was very open to questions about her writing style, her poems in the book, her grieving process, or anything else. She's completely open to any kinds of questions. So I'm going to start off, Taylor, with the first question. And I'm really curious about your writing process. How do the words come into your mind and then sort themselves out into the poems in your book?
That's a very good question. For me, it's a lot of notes app writing in the phone because as I'm sure a lot of other artists can attest to, oftentimes you have a really great idea for a project when you're in the middle of doing something else, when you literally cannot do it. So I often found that instead in school or in personal life, if I ever had a notebook in front of me, I would start jotting notes down to myself on like the margins of the pages. If I had my phone on me, I would put something down in a notes app. And sometimes it was something as simple as like a sentence that I'd come up with of a way of describing how I was feeling, or a visual that I saw that day that I thought could be incorporated into a poem. And then, really, when I have time and I'm able to, it's almost like a puzzle where you then sit down and you kind of work to place words where you think that they would make the most sense and convey the most emotion. Because I think that the goal of poetry is to try to convey what could potentially be a very simple thought, but in a way that makes you think. A good example that I can think of is trying to describe when you feel sad, but for no reason. There's no reason for you to feel sad. You can say, the sun is out, but the flowers are wilting, right? It's all about a way of making you pause and think a little more about the depth of what it is that you're actually explaining and feeling.
All right, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Another question that I would like to ask, having read all of your poetry, you have a really interesting style. You don't follow like the normal expected rules for things like punctuation, capitalization, spacing, font choice, like shading of fonts, words disappearing into the page. Wonder if you could tell us about all of those pieces, your style, and why you write that way.
Well, I know one of my favorite poets that I studied in school and love so much is E. E. Cummings, who is one of the poets that I would argue is very big for kind of breaking traditional poetic form. I mean, on one hand, I think the fun thing about poetry is that you get to play with it that way. It is one art form where you can really mess around with grammar and punctuation and spelling. But really, I wanted it to be a little deeper, even if it was just for me. Where during the time when I was going through grief and when I was working on this book, like I was 20 when Rachel passed away, and I turned 21 a few months later, and not a lot of peers in my circles quite knew how to handle that, especially to the extent that the grief was affecting our whole family. And what had often happened, or what it caused me to feel like, was that I stuck out like a sore thumb whenever I was spending time with people. It felt like people were walking on like eggshells around me, not wanting to set me off or anything. And I thought because of that, it would be really fun to play around with poetic form in that I also want it to stick out like a sore thumb, maybe be a little different, a little broken, maybe not how it's supposed to be. But I think that that's a really good kind of reflection of what the goal of the book is. It's supposed to be a little different to make you think.
I think that's a really good way of describing sort of the relationship changes that you were forced into at such a young age, losing Rachel, and we all losing Rachel, and the way people kind of responded to you and to us, having not gone through that themselves and not knowing how to respond and in what way to respond. All right, so I'm just going to check and see if there are any questions at this point from anyone here or online.
Not online, but I think we've got this microphone working again.
Okay, yes, one question in the back. Oh.
Hi Taylor. Are you gonna ever consider collaborating with another author, or are you gonna write like more books similar to this? Or are you gonna go in a different direction, or you don't know at this current time?
That's a very good question. I would absolutely be open to working with another author. I believe the way that a lot of musical artists kind of view an album as like a this big body of work, an era. If you're a Taylor Swift fan like me, I definitely see that with this book and probably, hopefully, more books that I publish in the future. Is I'm definitely open to kind of collaborating with people and exploring that. I think that really it's just as long as we're able to kind of come together and have one united vision. I would say that that's the goal for any book that I really want to create. But I absolutely would be open to that. In terms of the future, I definitely, obviously, still write poetry. I'm very open to publishing another poetry collection in the future. But I haven't quite determined, what the themes of it would be quite yet. I found interestingly when I was writing this book that naturally so many of my poems were talking about flowers and weather and winter and that kind of thing. So it just felt fitting that everything kind of worked. So maybe eventually I'll be writing poems and I'll see more similar themes and then I can tie that into another title.
Hi, Taylor.
Hi.
Hi. Would you ever consider maybe going into other genres of writing, such as like fiction or nonfiction or NHL fiction?
Okay, I'm gonna be real. Before this event started, my mom and I were reading through that book and our stomachs hurt from laughing. It's a fun read. So I don't know. If we get a petition going, I'll publish that. But yes, I actually really love doing National Novel Writing Month. I haven't done it in recent years because I've been busy and working on this, but definitely. Weirdly, I think I'd be more nervous to put out fiction because I'd be worried about getting critiqued, which is ironic given that like this is probably the most personal thing I'll ever make, and I'm like, whatever, it's fine. But definitely, I think definitely. But for things like that, it would definitely be like a process. I would really want to make sure that I'm putting out the best work possible. But absolutely, I would totally think about doing fiction, even like a type of memoir or something like that one day.
Okay, I'm going to continue on with a couple more. Oh, there we go. We got another question.
This one might be a little controversial.
Ooh, here we go.
What's your favorite?
Do you think mental health is like more taboo than like somebody's sexual orientation? You think it's like less recognized or yeah?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think it kind of depends also in a lot of social circles that you fall into. I think that really, like I'm very lucky because, right, my friends in my community, they're very open to talking about mental health in a grand scheme of things, but also individually, we're very good at checking on one another and making sure that we like have that space. I think that really it's just that for so long, mental health is seen in such a unique way, right? You see stories in the news of violence that has happened that's attributed to mental health or crimes that happen that's attributed to mental health. And I think that naturally it causes stigma to happen. And I think that it's up to us to slowly break that down by talking about it and recognizing that it's far more normal and common than we all really think.
Okay, I'm going to ask a few more questions and we'll check again to see if there are any others. So, Taylor, I would like you to talk a little bit about how the act of writing this poetry helped you with managing your grief over losing Rachel.
Well, so of course, when Rachel passed away, I was going to school and I was living at home at the time. And I was essentially, that's three people with a lot of very big feelings under one roof. But something that I found that I really struggled with at the time was how different our grief was. Because you, of course, you're grieving as a mother, my dad is grieving as a father, and I'm grieving as a sibling. Those are all very different. And that's not to say that any of them are harder or worse than another. It's to say that they're all very complicated and different. So, right, like me grieving the loss of a sister, my relationship with her would have been extremely different than a mother-daughter relationship. I found that I really, another factor of being so young when this happened is that because so many of my peers didn't quite know what to do, you often ran into like, I'm not sure if I'm even really allowed to talk about it. So, right, or I need to be very careful with what I do or don't say or what I describe. And I thought that poetry was like the perfect way for me to be able to just talk about it however I wanted and for as long as I wanted, and then no one could stop me. But I think it really helped me also kind of contextualize some of those feelings that I couldn't even quite work out. Like I didn't realize until I was actively writing that for a while I was very angry at a lot of things. And I think that being able to write and even analyze your own work is a very interesting way to get a peek inside your own mental health.
I think it's very interesting because I think we all discovered that when you do lose a member of your family, you just want to talk about it constantly. You want to talk about it constantly, and other people are afraid to hear it or are afraid to say the wrong thing or afraid to listen to that pain and that grief. So it's an interesting strategy for putting that somewhere when you run out of people who are interested in hearing the story.
I think it's also important because it's not necessarily very straightforward. It's not here is exactly what has happened and here is exactly how I feel. I think that the fun of poetry is that because there's art and because you kind of get to read into it a little more, it also makes it more accessible for other people to pick up that book and feel a connection maybe to some of those poems, even though they don't have the same experience that I do.
All right, so my next question is about the public nature of publishing your very private thoughts in your poetry. Putting your work out into the public can be very courageous and a brave thing to do, but it's also opening yourself up to the potential of criticism, either about your poetry, your style, or the subject matter that you've covered. So I'd be curious to know whether you've had any upsetting feedback to your poetry now being public, either the poetry itself or the heartbreaking content that it covers.
I'm very lucky because I have not seen any negative feedback towards the book. We got 5-star review on Amazon. So happy about that. But I have actually received some, I don't want to say backlash, maybe just misunderstanding from people from the activism side. A really good example that I can think of is I did an opinion piece for CBC in 2019 towards the end of the year, where I just talked about what it was like to lose my sister in general, but to also lose her in that kind of way where it's super hard to talk about it and people might be weird and not quite understand how or why it happened. Um, and so CBC shared it on their Facebook page, and I made the mistake of reading the comments. And there was a comment from one man who talked about how, like, well, when my brother died, I just had to suck it up and get on with it. And like, I don't understand why we need to change all this stuff in society, right? And I normally don't respond to comments. I did respond to this one. And all I said to him was, I'm really sorry to hear about the loss of your brother. And his entire tone changed. He responded again and he apologized. He's like, sorry if I came across as harsh. And then he said he thanked me. And then that was really the end of our conversation. And I think that that's a really great way to show, first of all, the initial stigma that a lot of people have, like the gut response that they have when they see the type of conversations that we're having. But again, that's very surface level. It's you look at, right, people will look at the article title, not read it, and then will leave a comment. But I also think that just goes to show that being kind and like not letting that deter you, keeping that motivation to still do it, it really does change people's perspectives because you're no longer just a figure talking at the public. You're engaging with them. You're making it become more personal in a sense. So I've always said that the worst thing that will ever happen to me has already happened when Rachel passed away. So in reality, anything to come my way now, I can handle, and I know I can. And I think part of putting a book out there is recognizing people are allowed to critique it, people are allowed to not like it, and people are allowed to talk about that. I just hope that it starts a conversation, really, whether it be good or bad. I just wanted to, get people to connect and talk with each other.
All right, I have another question, and then I'll see if there are any other questions from the group. So the introduction of your book, Tay, talks about that day that we found out Rachel died and how Rachel died. But none of your poetry actually addresses the fact that she was poisoned. Harm reduction is not a theme in any of your poems, but you do make a comment at the end of the book about supporting prairie harm reduction. I'm just wondering if you could explain why that is.
Yes. First of all, happy belated birthday, Prairie Harm Reduction. It was their birthday on October 1st. How adorable. But really, I wanted the poems in the book to stand on their own because I wanted people to get to know who Rachel was before they found out how she died. So, right, if someone picked up this book and did not read the introduction and just read through the book, they would get to know Rachel and our relationship and how much she was loved and how much we all loved her. And they really get to the loss before realizing what people think about addiction and mental health, because it's so easy to see, right? Oh, someone passed away from drugs and automatically write it off. It's different when you're emotionally invested in care and then learn, because it makes it more real. It makes it more real because you actually realize the stakes that other people are actively dealing with in this crisis, and that it really can happen to anyone. You've fallen in love with this girl that you've never met throughout this book, hopefully. And then you get to the end and then you realize that it still happened to her and it still happened to us. And I think that that is a very powerful message that I hope always gets to stay the case. But again, I believe very strongly in harm reduction services, and I wanted this book to honor Rachel, but I felt like I was doing a disservice if I didn't also acknowledge that those services could have theoretically saved her life and are saving lives of people like her.
Okay, thank you. Yes, there's another question.
Are there any YouTube channels or podcasts that have like this genre or subjects or that can people can get help from that you're aware of or you like to talk about?
So I will always recommend that people go listen to Bunny Hugs and Mental Health. It's run by my friend Todd, and he's very great he will always bring on guests that will talk about a variety of, mental health, tragedies that they went through in their life. Sometimes people will just come on to share their personal story, like their life story. But I believe it's a really great podcast to open up conversations. It's a really great forum in that sense. But he also is a very great interviewer and is really wonderful at asking questions that I personally think not a lot of other interviewers think to ask in that context. But that's also because Todd, he's a survivor. He has his own like mental health and addiction struggles. And I think because of that, it makes him like the perfect type of host for that type of podcast. So I highly recommend that. If you want, I will show you the YouTube channel after this.
Yes.
Online question.
Yes.
We've got an online question here. Two-part question. How long did it take you to write the book? And are you going to write another book? Which I feel like you hinted at, but maybe something more concrete there.
So, of course, yes, I would love to write another book. I have no idea how long or short of a time it will happen, but I would absolutely love that. Um, the book itself, so it started out as my honors thesis project for university. And so by the time that I graduated, I defended my thesis. I was already a pretty good working in progress book. It was pretty hefty for its size. And then in those years after I graduated, sometimes I would write a poem and would really love it and would want to add it to the working manuscript, or I would reread a poem and I would want to tweak it or adjust it. Sometimes I would combine two poems into one if I felt like they fit better. So, all in all, it was about a 5 year process, just from losing Rachel to it actually getting published. Because as I was sending the manuscript out to publishing houses, I was still like here and there making like little tweaks if I was overreading it and thinking too much. But in general, to get to the point that we're at today, about 4 or 5 years. So, but I'm glad that it took that long because I felt like I was able to craft it to exactly what I wanted it to be.
Hi, Taylor.
Hi, Carly.
So I just wanted to say it's a lovely book. I really like it. Melancholy and I put me in my feels. The cover of it is gorgeous. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So again, very big shout out to Vanguard Press and Pegasus Publishers, who were nothing but like absolutely amazing. Especially with dealing with the subject matter of this book. They're obviously not they're very used to people obviously having poetry books, but once they learned how important this was to me, they handled it with a lot of great care. And so they had offered to create the cover for me. And essentially, we had like a mini interview where they asked what I would like the cover to be. And I'm a big fan of letting artists kind of run a little wild. So I said, like, here are the boundaries. Like, it's going to be mental health focused. Like, I love the color yellow and it's all like floral. So go wild. And this was I think this was the second cover that they pitched me. And I was like, I love it. So I think it's so beautiful because of course it's like leaves and flowers that create the shape of a brain. And I think it's a very beautiful representation of the book, but also because right as you read the book, you go through every season. And the goal is that once you get to spring, it's all about rebirth and regrowth and things are growing again and life isn't miserable minus 40-degree winter anymore. And I thought that it was so poignant to have a picture of a brain essentially like blooming again because I definitely feel like once this book was done, I felt like I got a little bit of myself back.
Hi.
Hi again.
Yeah. Would you ever do a revised book of the same book, like with added poems or like your emotions later in later years?
That's a really good idea. I would absolutely love that. I think that'd be a really great idea. I think that it would be very interesting, even just in a few years down the line, to do something with that, just as a reflection. So I'm very open to that. That is a wonderful idea. You need to get on my marketing team.
Got another online question here. It reads, people are afraid to do or say anything hurtful to someone going through grief. What was the most and least helpful to you?
Oh, that's very good. Okay, least helpful was I know exactly how you feel. My dog died 3 years ago. That's not the same thing. Sorry for your loss though. Probably one of the best things that my friends did for me, first of all, was show up. They they came to the funeral, they were really there for me. They would just text me to check in, which I think was very important. I think it's very easy, especially for after a funeral ends, people are like, our job is done, right? They can figure it out on their own now. So having friends that were very involved and having friends that asked about her, right? Like they remembered that it's her birthday and they would say like, oh, what's a good memory that you have with Rachel? And I think that those are the best. Of course, being respectful in terms of if someone is clearly very distraught, just make sure that, you read their emotions. But I think a big thing that people don't realize about people who have struggled with grief is we want to talk about them. So ask us questions about them, right? Ask what movies they loved, or if I ever went to McNally Robinson with them. We did.
Okay, so last chance for any questions, either online or from the group assembled here today. And if none, I want to say thanks again to McNally Robinson. I'll actually turn it over to Taylor for thank yous. And then we will, for those that would like a signed copy of the book, we'll set it up.
Yes. So of course, thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you again to McNally Robinson for hosting us. This has been like such a crazy whirlwind of an experience. So this has been very wonderful. Thank you to Jasper for all of the help with emails back and forth and getting everything organized. I also very appreciate that. We're obviously going to be doing a signing. You're more than welcome to hang out. Go browse other books. There's tons. I recommend the poetry section. That's right over there. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming, for listening, and for engaging. I think that this was very important. So thank you.